Hello friends, we are starting the first of two sections of stab binding. All right, so you should have a handout on this that looks like this. Stab binding is something that originated in Asia, and it's a very smart, very straightforward way of creating a binding. I've got some examples here that I can show you. We are going to start with a not so fancy sewing, but the fancy sewings really don't add much to the structure. What they do is they just look good. So essentially, the structure is like this. You have your cover, of course you have the back cover, and then you have your pages. Everything is one single page, all right? So you don't have to figure out the order of the pages when you're planning the book. And for that reason, this is a great way for artists to put together images that they're not quite sure in advance how they're gonna really come together. So you can put them together like this. These are loose pages, this is bound, but the thing that you have to keep in mind is the binding is going to pierce through a section of your pages. So the pages are this long, right? But you're losing this much plus a little bit more for turning the page. Now, if you have really thick paper, you have to think about that turning business, because if it's really thick, you're gonna lose space every time you turn, you know, a bunch of pages. It's gonna pile up. You can see how it's piled up here, even with these really thin pages. So we're gonna do a 3-hole hardbound sewing to get us started on this. And I just want to point out some other stuff that's here. This starts off with a Chinese account book. This is a really sweet little book. The sewing directions are right there. This is what we're going to be doing today. All right. And then in our next section, we're going to do fancy sewing. Fancy. So, anywho, we'll get to the fancy stuff later. All right. So here is our package. Stab binding, and everything is a different size here, which is a little confusing, but I want to tell you the logic of it. All right, so this is what's going to happen. We're going to have a hardbound book, and essentially we are going to create what is called a French groove or a gutter in between this part and this part. This is where it's going to be attached. This is where the hardback book is going to turn. This is one solid piece. You could make this the exact same way on both sides if you want both sides to turn, but we're going to start off pretty simple. We need paper that covers the back side, which is a bigger area, and then we need more paper to cover this side, and we also need book cloth to cover the interior. All right. So here we go. Oh, and we have a little thing for our jig. All right. All right, friends. Let us start with just covering this board. All right. So I'm gonna get some paper down here so I have a glue space. I'm gonna cover my biggest piece of board, Davy board, with my biggest piece of paper. I'm gonna center that, and it's already been cut to the size that you want it to be. I'm just gonna eyeball this. It's about 1 inch on all sides, maybe a little bit more on the top and bottom. Boop, 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 boop. All right, I've traced this. Now I'm going to use another piece of board to do my measuring. Remember, I always need 1.5 times the thickness of the board in order to cover it. I'm going to create a little diagonal here at the edge. You can get fancy with this, with different angles, but this is really very straightforward and easy and looks great. So I'm doing this to all 4 corners so that I am measuring one thickness of this board. When you do this yourself, if the edges don't meet, you didn't do a full thickness. And we're not just doing a full thickness, actually. We're doing a full thickness of the board and a half. So the half, we have to just sort of like figure out. And we're gonna figure it out simply by cutting slightly to the right of the drawn line. So I'm not cutting on the line, I'm cutting a little bit to the right of the line. All right, so the distance from the corner should be 1.5 times the thickness of the board. How thick should it be? 1.5 times the thickness of the board. Okay, now I'm ready to go with this. I'm going to use my glue stick, which I think is fine, particularly for doing a dummy book like this, but also for paper. It's not fine for, what's it not fine for? It's not fine for fabric, things that really need to have more strength, something, an adhesive with more strength. Okay, I'm gluing from the inside out. A bit more glue stick. I remember when I was in 7th grade, they sold these lip gloss things that looked just like this, felt just like this, and they were in different flavors, like 7-Up, and Coca-Cola, and root beer. I always hated root beer, but my sister had one of the root beer ones because she was really into root beer. I liked the 7-Up. Anyway, I always have a flashback of that. I was in love with Sean Cassidy, which you probably don't know who he was, but he sang that song, "Did You Run, Run, Run?" I'm not gonna sing it for you because you'd die. Okay, there's my gluey paper. I'm gonna get rid of this surface. Goodbye, surface. I'm gonna lay this down again. Glue side up. I'm going to place my big board carefully right where I drew it, okay? And then I'm going to keep consistent with the top or bottom or sides, meaning I'm going to fold over my top and bottom. I'm gonna use my newsprint, my clean newsprint to do that. So I'm gonna take this and use that for the fold over there, right? And then I'm gonna do the same thing with the bottom. This is gonna be a long, skinny book. All right, so I've got that. In each corner, I've got that little hangover, right? Little hangover. I'm going to take my bone folder and push that towards the inside. Push. So I'm smashing it down towards the inside. You've done this before. All right. Now I'm going to glue down the ends. Nice. Oops. Hooray, look at it. It's nice and flat. Incidentally, if you have a paper that wants to kind of wrinkle, you can use some wax paper and use your bone folder to carefully push things down flat. All right, just going forward, but this paper should be fine. All right, next bit of business, you might say, oh, let us do this. And then you might say, oh no, it is too small, right? That's because we're not using it in the same way. For one, this is gonna be the way we use it. But we are going to be covering this so that you can see some of the book cloth for our attachment. So let's get that moving. All right. Here's our book cloth. And this book cloth looks slightly too long, so I might cut it for a second, but this is fine. So basically, this is what's gonna happen. This should hang over about an inch on either side because I'm gonna be folding it over. This plus this should make up this, all right? So if I put these together, I want this to be the same. So in other words, this is the same length as this plus this. Now there's going to be a gap here, and you want that gap. This gap is called the French groove, and the French groove should be 3.5 times the thickness of the board if you want it to fold completely over, all right? So that is about, in this instance, about 1/4 inch. So I'm just simply gonna draw where this stuff needs to go, because when the glue is there, it's gonna be high pressure. Okay, so there's that. And then, of course, we want these to be as straight as possible, because if they're not, guess what? Our book is not straight. I'll move this so you can see what I've done. This looks crooked, I better straighten it out. Okay, so this is what I've drawn right here, all right? So I have about 1 inch here, 1 inch here, 1 inch here. This is about 1/4 inch. I took the liberty of measuring all of this stuff out prior to this demonstration. So if you're on your own figuring this out, remember, you want, for a comfortable turnover here, 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 you want about 1 inch. So if my book cover, let's say it's 5.5 height, right? That means I'm gonna add 1 inch to each end. So in other words, 5.5, this would be 7.5, okay? So I'm just adding 1 inch on each side, and then here, another inch. This, I know from experience that this is about the right amount of space for a French groove. Now, this is gonna be turned over, right? And it's just like a piece of paper. It needs to be nice. So this is the corner, the outside is the corner where it is going to be turned and where you need to make your diagonal so that you have a nice beveled spot. This one was too big, so I'm doing it over. All right, now I'm gonna cut it like I did before, a little bit to the right. A little bit, too much. A little bit to the right, just like before. Now, book cloth. This is nice, right? I got this from Talus, which is an online book supply place. They do have a location in Brooklyn, but it's kind of off the beaten track. And even though you can walk in there, they really do cater to more, you know, online stuff, and particularly now that probably is the case. You can also get book cloth from Michael's, arts and crafts stores. Artists and Craftsman has some. This is really nice. The color, sort of like a shark skin. You won't find such variety at a place like Michael's, but you know, you'll find something that's serviceable. And if you want something a little fancier, then order some from Talus. Yeah, so what makes book cloth? Book cloth is cloth, right? But it has paper adhered to one side, all right? And the paper makes life so much better because the glue has a barrier where it's not gonna come through the outside of your book. Some people make their own book cloth. I have never done that myself, but I think it would be tricky because it needs to be really thin and flat. So I don't really recommend it, only because I've never done it myself. All right, so now we're gonna do some gluing. Now remember we said fabric needs more, well, a stronger glue, okay? So we're using straight PVA. Some people like to mix their PVA with something called methacellulose, which is another archival glue, which is wonderful. It's a natural glue. And interestingly enough, if you have a grandmother that maybe isn't regular, she may have taken something called Metamucil. Of course, that's never happened to you, but Metamucil, which is methacellulose in that. It basically is a thickening agent. Of course, that's not your problem. All right. When they do that, it is to slow down the drying time. If you're doing something really large, this is not really large, but let's say I was doing something really, put this down, something really big, then by the time I spread out the glue, it might start drying on me, right? Which is not something we like. So in order to slow down the drying time, some people mix PVA with methacellulose, sometimes 25% methacellulose, sometimes 50%, usually no more than that, or the methacellulose, which isn't a very strong glue, starts to make this not, that mix not a good adhesive. Now for us, I've given you straight PVA, polyvinyl adhesive, also known as Jade. And the reason I've done that is simply because we're using small bits and there's no reason to mix this up. So I'm going to put thin layer on here. Again, as I apply glue, I'm always working from the inside out. Thin layer, trying not to allow this to scoot around while I'm doing it. Blink. And now I'm going to pick this up carefully and I'm going to get rid of this gluey piece of paper. All right. This is starting to curl. Keep your cool. All right. And put it down, and you're going to place your board in that little spot where you drew it, and you're going to place this other little stick of Davy board. Now, as you look at this, while you're able, make sure that it's straight, okay? That this isn't like, because that'll haunt you forever. You can't undo that. So while the PVA is still wet, make sure that you do that. Okay. I'm going to use this to fold over this and this. All right, now I'm going to fold over that after I've squished down the edges. Squish, squish, and that gets flattened over. And so you're left with this. You may say, ew, that's disgusting how I can see this. Well, we're going to cover that up. All right, I've got another piece of this, and I suspect that I have the wrong piece because I had all my materials out, but this is what we're aiming for. This can be larger, certainly. This isn't going to kill me to have it like this, but what I want is for this to be slightly smaller. And I'm looking at this piece, it hangs over a little bit. So I'm going to trim it. So it's nice and straight. I'm going to use a knife, my ruler. I only want to cut off a little bit. Now here's what I want to do. This is 5.5, okay? So I don't want a full quarter of an inch of a gap here. So what I do so that I have something between 1/8 of an inch and a quarter is I just subtract a quarter. So this is 5.5. So I'm going to make my interior cover here, my interior paper, 5.25. Okay. So as I measure this, it's going to be 5.25. That's what I'm aiming for. I don't know what went wrong. Sometimes things just go wrong. Remember, it was your old professor that cut up all these materials, so forgive me if something's wrong. You always have to forgive your old people. Okay, so there's where I'm going to be cutting it. Remember how neat these rulers are. We can line this up so it's straight. So I'm looking through and it is lined up there. I'm going to hold this down and I'm going to not put a lot of pressure down. And that's all I really need to do. Sometimes if you put a lot of pressure down, you'll slip and cut off the top of your thumb, which I did. Remind me to tell you about sometime. All right, so this is what's going to happen with this. This is going to go on top of this. And you know, now that I'm all persnickety and I want to cut this down, I think I'm going to cut this so that it's the same as that. So in other words, I'm cutting off some of this. Now this is going to get covered up. This edge is going to get covered up with paper, so I'm not at all worried about that pencil mark that I just made. doesn't have to be this way. The reason I'm cutting it down is simply because there will be a slight edge here where you can see the thickness of this, all right? So as I lay this down, before I glue it, I want you to look at it. So this is slightly smaller, okay? Slightly smaller, not a lot smaller. If you have some big, ugly gap here, it's terrible. It looks awful. All right. Here we are. We're gonna glue this baby down. Now, some people who don't like sharp corners like this will actually sand the edges of their board, and they'll also kind of tap this down while this is wet and sort of smush down those corners so they're not as sharp. All right, I'm gonna take this baby and thin layer of glue. Boop. My dog, most of his baby teeth were like, they were so sharp. They were like little tiny steak knives, and he was teething and biting me all the time. So, less bites. He's getting older. All right, this is curling on me. Yikes. This also tells me the direction of the grain, and usually we try to have the direction of the grain go up and down with the book, so the height of the book. But when in doubt, just make sure that all of your materials are going in the right direction. So let's say it was all going in this direction. Well, make sure that the board, the paper, and the book cloth all go in the same direction. Now, I've laid this down. I'm gonna kind of push this down so that my French groove gets embossed a bit, so that when I turn this, it doesn't get all crunchy and weird. All right, so this should be the same, hallelujah, as this, okay? Now I can take this paper and cover this. So this little spot that we put in, we glued down, that's the inside of the book. That's not the outside of the book. Anything that's like not perfect, that's the inside. Things that are continuous, that's the outside. I marked this with the grain of this paper so it would be easy for me to align up. And now I need to make a decision. The decision is this: how much do I want this to overlap this fabric? So it's always the paper on top of the fabric, not the other way around. I could have it where I show a lot of the fabric, right? I could have it where I show just a little bit of the fabric. What I don't want to do is cover up that French groove. No, don't do that. So I'm just basically gonna maybe have it about 1 inch out. And again, I'm gonna trace this. And I'm gonna use this, oops, on the corner, just like I've been doing for everything else. I'm gonna cut just to the right of this. And we know what we're gonna do next. Because this is only covering one edge, I only need to do one edge. So it's gonna go like that, boop, fold, fold, smush, smush, fold. That's what we're gonna be doing. Okay, put this over here. God help me if I knock that over. Wouldn't that be terrible? Probably pretty entertaining, but not good. All right, I'm gonna get some glue on here. The dog though, the puppy, his name is Nugget. He doesn't let me sleep past 4 without being awakened. And of course I caved. There's no crating going on here with the dog. He sleeps in the bed. And at night around 4, he crawls up onto my head and starts pulling my hair or just jumping all over me. That wakes me up. All right, so this is on the inside, what we glued down. This is the nice side. So we're putting this face down. And we're gonna use our paper to glue this down. It's gonna cover the fabric. That's supposed to happen. That's exactly what you wanna do. You are not lining it up, okay? This is supposed to cover. Smush, smush. Stunning. Okay, so this is done. All right, nice. Okay, here is our jig. Let's find our paper. Where did I put paper? Surely it was in that baggie I just had. Is this it? Probably. Let's see. Oh, woe is me. Woe is I. Whoa. Terrible woe. If this is not it, I'm gonna cut it really quick. And you can laugh. You can laugh to yourselves. Ha-ha! It is it. No more laughing. Okay, let me pull. Yuck, I don't want to do orange, but I guess I will. Or green. Maybe the green's better. I'll do the green. All right, this can be as thick as I like it to be, but we need to make sure we can tap a hammer through it. Now, this is probably a little too thick. I'm gonna go with a bundle somewhere in this neighborhood. A little chunk of paper. I don't know how many pages that is. I suspect it's between 15 and 20. I wanna show you what I've done with the book, or the pages. So these pages should sit in here, and I've made them ever so slightly smaller, all right? Ever so slightly smaller. Now, if you wanted to, you can make this smaller, but typically with stab bindings, because this is gonna have thread that's wrapped around the edge, the pages are exactly the same size, or only ever so slightly smaller like it is here, okay? The pages are gonna sit flush against this edge. This overhang here is by design. Oh, we didn't cover this one up. Okay, we'll do that. But first I wanna just continue on this train of thought. So we have this like so, okay? Let me see what I have here in terms of my supplies to cover that. I think this is what I chose to cover it on both sides. Yeah, okay, good. Good, good, good. Up, and here's the piece of cloth that I should have used, so it was cut correctly. All right, so this, I'm gonna use to cover this, because of course this is unsightly. So this again, you can see it doesn't go all the way to the edge. It's not supposed to. It's about 1/4 of an inch smaller than the full length of this and the full height. So I'm gonna glue this down first. I'm gonna use my glue stick. This is just bond paper, so it's a little thicker than regular old photocopy paper. But you don't have to use a thick paper for this per se. It's just easier to handle. But you don't need to. It could be just some beautiful, lovely, decorative paper that's very fine and lightweight. That'd be perfectly fine. Okay, its purpose is simply to cover this. So I'm gonna try to make this as even as I possibly can and straight, because I do care about my craftsmanship. I don't like putting the bone folder directly on a piece of paper because sometimes it'll make marks, all right? So if I'm flattening something out, like the glue, I'm working from the middle out. I'm using this flat, right? Not like that to flatten this out and make sure that it's really stuck. So there's that. This is gonna go on top of this. Oh, it's pretty close, right? I just eyeballed that, so it worked out pretty well. So it lines up. Getting rid of my gluey spots. Now I'm going to carefully lay this down. And I want this to be even, this little edge around here, as even as I possibly can make it. Even as humanly possible. If you can't do it the first time, try it again, try it again, try it again, and then you will be so good at it. Okay. A little bit of glue there. That doesn't make me happy, but I'm going to just continue on. So here we are. Here's our interior paper. Now, I want you to jog all of the pages together, and I want this side to be straight. So if there's a little bit of overhang of the cover, that's okay. Just want to make sure that's, so this is what I'm doing. So I think it's better I can illustrate this way. So this side is flush. If this is a little smaller, that's perfectly fine, but this side needs to be flush with the edge of the book. Once you've determined that to your satisfaction, you can take a rubber band gently, or whatever you want to kind of keep everything set. I have this one rogue piece of paper that keeps moving, and I think it's because I've got some stickiness on the other side of this. All right. Blink. Okay, so I don't want to use something that's going to make a mark on my book. So my clothespin is a pretty good candidate. Now, I need to make my jig. My jig is going to consist of 3 holes, and we know how to make that. That is the height of the book, this little piece of paper here, right? And I could measure it, but I'm going to just do it this way. I'm going to fold this in half, and I will instantly have found the middle. And then I'm going to fold this in half, and I will have found the middle of my middle. Okay, so I found 3 measurements. Now, we're used to cutting out the edge so that we can determine our stations, right? It's not what we're gonna do here. I mean, theoretically we could do that here, but we're gonna be putting our holes here, right, in the middle of this little stick. So look at this. So in here, we're gonna put it in the middle of that, okay? It's not going in here. No, it's not. It's going here, okay? So we could do one of 2 things. We could measure that. That's probably a 1/2 inch. But let me just use my ruler, because my ruler is awfully nice. Yep, 1/2 inch. Half inch. This is where my hole is gonna go in each one of these spots, all right? My next move is going to be to make the holes. And, I need to get my my hammer. Wait. Wait. Don't move. Don't go anywhere. Wait, I'm getting my hammer. You might say, hey, now there's no hammer in my box. That was on your supply list, a hammer. So most people have a hammer somewhere in the house, all right? If you don't, look for like a meat mallet or something like that, right? For pounding chicken into little cutlets. That will work fine. All right, so here we are. Let's make our little holes. So basically, this goes up against this, right? Against that edge. And with my awl, I'm going to poke some holes in here. Now that's not going to go through everything. So I've got my whole package together, right? And now I can see those holes, but they're not going through, right? So this is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to be gentle. So this is a delicate sort of tool, right? It's easy to snap and then you don't have the tool anymore. So we're going to be kind of nice to it. I actually look to see, I have one that's slightly more stout. So I'm going to use that one. I'm gonna put it straight down and bang, 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 bang. Move it around. Bang, 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 bang. So I'm not going crazy with this banging because I don't want to destroy my tool. But I'm not being a wimp either. I'm trying to get through all of these materials, right? Didn't go through, so I'm going to give it another pass. And again, I'm trying to keep this as straight as I possibly can. I think I'll do this one in the middle first. Oh, your family or roommates are going to love this. I think that one's through. Yeah. And again, we're not doing this on our dining room table without like a piece of chipboard or something underneath. I think that your cutting mat will do a fine job. All right. My clothespin just slipped off, but here are my tiny holes on the back. Get that back. I think a bowl clip would work better. All right, tiny holes on the back, that's not gonna be enough. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stick my awl in there and I'm gonna open it up. Why do I need to have big holes? I need big holes because of my thread. My thread is gonna be a little heavier than our normal thread. And the needle is gonna go in and out at least 3 times. So we need to be able to accommodate the thread and the needle for all of those movements. So here we go. I'm just gonna keep it open here. Now, you may say to yourself, why, Professor Fox? Why, oh why don't you use a drill? You can use a drill. But I didn't want to make the assumption that everyone had a drill, and this works. You can use a nice Dremel tool if you have one. I would use a fairly small bit. So I need these holes to be right, because if they're not, I will not be able to sew, and I'm going to get myself into a pickle, a frustrating pickle. I remember my mother's stepmother, who was my step-grandmother, used to make pickled like green beans and tomatoes, and I always thought that was bizarre as a kid, but they're kind of good. Funny how your tastes change when you're an adult. You have disgusting tastes as an adult. Like I used to hate Brussels sprouts. Now, yum! I love a Brussels sprout. Okay. So I think that's gonna work. My needle. Now you have a selection of needles. I also gave you some embossing thread, all right? Not embossing. what's the word that I want? When you're sewing and you're making like little pretty flowers and stuff. I don't know why I can't think of that. But this is slightly heavier than your regular thread, slightly thicker. You can use other things. You can use hemp, you can use twine, you can use thin ribbon. All those things look great. So whatever you like, you should use. Now this stuff is really, like not like our thread. It's made up of a lot of different little threads coming together, a multi-filament. And so we can't do our special move with this. So let's see. What needle shall I select? And again, I'm just doing this by eye. I don't want a really thick needle because I need to get through those holes properly. But the eye of the needle needs to be big enough to accommodate this. So I gotta figure that one out. Aha, got it through, hallelujah. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I am not doing our special move where I stab. No, I'm gonna wing it this way. Has to do with the material more than anything else. So that I'm leaving a little tail of maybe 4 inches there. And then with this kind of thing, it depends on the complexity of your sewing pattern. This is a very straightforward sewing pattern that is not gonna be hard at all, but you don't wanna run out of thread while you're doing it. So this is what I'm gonna tell you. For this kind of book, I would say 3.5 times the height of the book is the way to go. All right, so we're not measuring necessarily by the signature, but rather, or the number of signatures, because there's only one in here. We're gonna go with this, and because we're doing some sewing that's gonna be overlapping, we're gonna give ourselves 3.5 times, and that's reasonable. It's a fine balance between having enough thread, right? This is fairly long, but you don't want so much thread that you end up with it becoming a big tangle. All right. Now, wherever I start is where I'm going to end. So if I start from the front, that's where I'm gonna end. All right, and already I can see, oh, there we go. So I'm gonna sew straight through here, and I'm gonna leave some excess, a little tail here. Can you see that? So it's like 3 inches or so. I'm going to immediately go right back into that hole. So I'm on this side, and I'm gonna go through this again from the outside of the book. So you see that? It's intuitive to go here and here, but I'm not doing that. I'm going to the outside of the book. So now I'm on the back. I'm gonna do another stitch straight over. Doesn't matter which direction, because you don't have a lot of choices here. And then here I am again, right? And I'm gonna go around this and go through the same hole again. All right, you might say to yourself, aha, I know what to do next, but you should just be patient. What we're gonna do next is go around the edge of the book, like a little L. So I'm gonna go around the book, loop through, and go through the same hole again. That's why our hole needed to be kind of big. That needle just went in it 3 different times. And depending on the thickness of the thread that you end up using, you have to make sure that you have enough to accommodate. Okay, so this side is almost done. So I'm gonna go back in here. I'm gonna go straight through this, right? And I'm gonna do the same thing to the other side. Link stitch or running stitch right over. I'm gonna go around the outside of the book. Okay, and then I'm gonna go around the corner. Like so. And then I'm gonna find myself here, which is a very nice place to be. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to sew under this, right? I'm not going through the hole. I'm gonna sew straight under here so that this thread is on this side and this thread is on this side, right? And I'm going to pull it tight and I'm gonna make a knot. That was somebody sneezing, listen. Oh, he's not sneezing anymore. That's my next door neighbor. Okay, so one knot there. Another knot just for sure. That's not gonna move around. Now, you got all this stuff hanging off. If you use something that was a little bit more decorative than this, then you could tie a pretty little bow. This could be a fussy little thing. You know, it just totally depends on what you want it to be. I'm not into it being too fussy right now. I'm going through a non-fussy stage. So I'm just gonna snip this off pretty close. That was him blowing his nose. All right, and there we are. Now, look at this. We can fold this back and it looks really great. Nice, huh? Okay, so, as I fold this back, I want you to notice that the pages don't naturally want to fold back. So you are going to have to, if you want this to be, you know, really easy to use, you're going to take your bone folder and you're going to create a little bit out from the edge here. You're going to create some creases here so that when people turn the page, it's easy. Now, newsflash, the creases aren't going to be the same all the way through the same book because every time this page turns, there's going to be the thickness of the page, right? So if you really want to make this nice, you can increase each page and work your way through the whole book. That's what you would do if you were creating a lovely book that was not a dummy book, a book that had art in it, content in it, etc. Okay? But for our purposes, our dummy book is done for this. We are going to do some more stab binding with some fancy sewing, but this is basically what you need to know about stab binding. You're going to cover some of the pages. The pages are loose and individual. They're not folded. And it's a really great book for any artist. See you in part 2.